they have academic standing, public and private, modality, whether or not it was online or in person. Okay. They did not in here anyway. That's interesting because I would love to know what these self-censorship rates are by the different majors. To be honest, I really would be curious to know that. So I may go dive into that myself. See if I can find that, if it's in the data, if it's not in the data. So, Heterodox Academy, if you by any chance recorded the majors of these students, I'd be very curious to see what it is based on the different disciplines. Two things from the Heterodox Academy this week. This actually came out last week, but as I said, I often have said that, we need to pay attention to what's going on at universities with respect to viewpoint diversity and free speech and what have you, because it is where we train the next generation of scientists. Or at least currently it is. And so every year, I think they started in 2019, if I recall correctly, they do the Campus Free Expression Survey, the Campus Expression Survey, if you will. Yes, the Campus Expression Survey. And so the one for 2022 is now out and available, published in March of 2023. And so I thought it would be a good time to go through and take a look. I do actually want to do a little something more with the survey, because on the Heterodox Academy website, you can find all the data for each survey that they have done. And so I am inclined to take a closer look at it and run some numbers for myself with respect to certain things and see what comes of it. Do some science, as it were. So I'm going to go through some of the key points from this, and particularly in those takeaways that they talk about here. And so whatever you think of them, they do the surveying that is sometimes important. So, from the executive summary first, the 2022 HXA Campus Expression surveyed. Anyway, 1,564 full-time college students ages 18 to 24 across the United States in November of 2022. The sample was stratified by region, race, and gender. Our fourth year of data collection has yielded continued insights into the problem of campus expression by students. It also offers small signs of hope that viewpoint diversity and open inquiry may be improving from a student perspective. We shall see. Takeaway number one in here. Did they have more down here? Students' reluctance to discuss Wait a second, where is it? Saw it down here. Yes, there's a little bit more depth in the takeaways when you get down a little bit further. That's what I was actually looking for. Students' reluctance to discuss controversial topics remains high, but shows signs of improvement. Consistent across the 4 years of the Campus Expression Survey data collection, nearly 2 in 3 students reported self-censoring on at least one of the controversial topics asked about. Our 2022 data shows that the percentage of students reporting self-censure remained high at 58.5% in 2022, although it represented a slight decrease from 60% in 2021. Question, of course, is whether or not that's a statistically significant decrease. I don't think they got into that in here, but that may be one of the things I get into. We observed a consistent pattern of a slight decrease of self-censure across the past 3 years. Slightly fewer students reported self-censoring on the 5 controversial topics asked about: gender, politics, race, sexual orientation, and religion. After a spike in reported self-censure between 2019 and 2020. I almost said 1919. Demographic variables continue to be associated with differences in self-censure on controversial topics. Okay. Students' reluctance is associated primarily with fear of negative social consequences from peers. Okay, before we continue, one point to make on this. This is actually pretty high. And so it is really concerning when students feel that way. And if that is a continued feeling that you cannot speak your mind about certain things as you go into, from academia as a student to whatever your profession is going to be, that I don't think is helpful and long term healthy for a career. So then again, I don't know, they haven't done the study for that necessarily. There's not a longitudinal study of that, but it would perhaps follow that if one is afraid to speak your mind on certain topics for whatever reason, um, that would actually be harmful when you're in a workspace, in that you are not asserting yourself when the situation calls for it, perhaps, or you are simply afraid to lose your job, for whatever reason. Whatever thing you might say that would offend somebody is perhaps the reason why you're self-censoring. Any number of different reasons. This is not good to see in students. Now, what I don't know with the demographics, and this is maybe actually what I want to get into, if they had the data for this, because I don't know, is what is this by major? Is actually what I'm really, really curious about. What is this number by major? And admittedly, maybe not enough to, group things off into specific majors, but okay, maybe you stick all the physical sciences students together versus all the humanities students, versus engineering, things like that. Figure out how to break it off into different disciplines, or different groups of disciplines, and tell me what that number is, because I'm actually really, really curious about that. So that's something I may go back into myself and see if we can't figure it out, because I'm really quite curious about that. But anyway, shall we continue? The primary reported reason for why students self-censor on controversial topics in the classroom was fear of negative reactions or retribution from fellow students. Can I just put it this way? Peer pressure, maybe? As a thought? When students who expressed reluctance to share their views on a controversial topic were asked to write their reasons why, the top response category was fear from other students, representing 32.9% of total responses. So what was the rest? Because that's not a majority. I mean, that may be the plurality. It might be the largest number response. But what were the others? What was the second one and the third one? Students were then provided a list of 8 pre-filled reasons why they might self-censure, and 62.3% of students chose, quote, other students would make critical comments with each other after class, and 57% of students chose other students would criticize my comments as offensive. There was a mismatch between what students feared from other students and what they reported they would do if a fellow student expressed a viewpoint they disagreed with. The top response students chose when asked what they themselves would do if another student expressed a different viewpoint, endorsed by 66.3% of students, was, I would ask questions to better understand. Now, this is interesting, actually. You're afraid of other students. There's a fear of other students being offended, if you will. My cats are opening the bathroom cabinets. Pardon that. If the sound comes across on the mic, I apologize. It's interesting that it's roughly 2/3 of students, are saying critical comments. I'm going to get, talked about in a negative light with my peers. Students would be, think I said something offensive when you probably didn't. And then the opposite thing here of, I would ask questions to better understand. This is an interesting thing because I wonder, this is another reason I would want to get into the data. Is it students who answered that they were afraid of what other students would say? How much overlap is there with that to students who said they would ask questions to better understand? That's the curiosity thing. Now, they go on down here to say, in contrast, 15.6% of students said they would speak out to criticize them as being offensive, and 21.7% said they would not say anything during class, but would make critical comments outside of class. Overall, students' reports suggest they overestimate their peers' negative reactions to their expressed views in class by about 3 times, a puzzle for future research. Indeed. So, this is the question that I wonder when I read this. That 15.6% of students, which I think is still quite high to say that you're offensive right there. Are they the loudest? Meaning, do they make the most ruckus when they want to say something like that? In which case they make other students afraid of them, that 15%? That would be the question. Because they're not a majority, obviously. But they may be screaming loud enough that they're drowning everybody else out who just wants a civil conversation. And as to the 21% who would make critical comments outside of class, that's not helping matters. Because, yeah, that's just not helping matters at all here. But that's the question I ask, is that why are the 37-ish% together in that group, holding back the other 2/3 of students from actually having that civil debate? Because this suggests to me that for all the stuff that goes on campus, 2/3 of students would love to have these conversations, and they're just afraid to do it. And I just wonder if it's because this loud group of people, or maybe not so loud group of people, are the ones who are making it impossible to have those conversations. Just by sheer fear, if you will. Again, puzzle for future research is the right thing. Still not good either way. Because it can be a very isolating feeling, I think, or at least I would think that, if you don't think you can ask a question about something because you'll be offended. You'll be offended. Somebody else will be really offended. So that's an interesting problem. Takeaway number 3, high peer interaction is associated with greater expression among students. Yeah. Our data shows that students who reported high levels of interaction with students were less likely to self-censor and more likely to feel confident to share their views in the classroom. In fact, across the controversial topics asked about in the survey, at least 10% more students reported reluctance to share their views in the classroom if they reported lower amounts of peer interaction compared with students who reported a high amount of peer interaction. Fascinating, interesting, isn't it? I think it was in James Lindsay's New Discourses recently hosted a thing on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and breaking down those 3 things and why they're not necessarily the nice, warm, fuzzy things some people seem to think they are, at least as they currently are represented. He was very cautious about that, but he talked about some of the original surveys with respect to diversity, when diversity was about diversity of viewpoints and diversity of perspective entirely, and talked about how that got improved and how people were more likely to work with each other in the early studies finding this, and more likely to work with each other if you were just setting them down to work together toward a common goal. In other words, they were interacting and having to get to know each other. And I wonder if that's the same thing here. It's like, hey, you know this person well enough to know they won't get super duper offended, and people won't get super duper offended. And you got people who know that you have different opinions, but you're not a monster. Those kinds of things. So I wonder if that's something of the reason why they are. Campus culture needs continued improvement to foster viewpoint diversity. When asked about the broader campus climate, 61% of students reported that their university frequently or very frequently encourages students to consider a wide variety of viewpoints and perspectives on issues. This is a 17-point increase since 2021, but similar to 2019 levels. Although this is encouraging news, this means that 39% of students reported that their institutions were not explicitly encouraging viewpoint diversity frequently on campus. Although top-down communications from one's institution is necessary to foster a climate that values diverse perspectives, sustained culture change takes time. The majority of students, 63.2%, still feared causing offense if they openly expressed their views on campus, which has increased nearly 10 points since 2019 and 2020. So, this is certainly an interesting thing here. And yeah, that might be nice. I don't necessarily think that it's just top-down communications that needs to happen. Because what's going on at that what's going on at that sort of cultural level that would what's going on at the grassroots, let's put it that way, of the campus. And frankly, does a top-down approach really see that all the time? So I do wonder about that kind of thing also. There's a lot more in here. Did they actually include the majors? Political orientation, total family income. Well, they have academic standing. Public and private. Modality, whether or not it was online or in person. Okay. They did not in here anyway. That's interesting, because I would love to know what these self-censorship rates are by the different majors. To be honest, I really would be curious to know that. So I may go dive into that myself. See if I can't find that, if it's in the data, if it's not in the data. So, Heterodox Academy, if you by any chance recorded the majors of these students, I'd be very curious to see what it is based on the different disciplines, with the different, physical sciences versus social sciences versus business versus other kinds of disciplines, if you got enough data for that. Students' reluctance to discuss specific topics. So yeah, there's definitely some reluctance in here. There's definitely some interesting stuff in here just as I'm reading through it. I'm not going to flip through all of it today, so I take a suggestion from me, though. I suggest you go read through it and tell me what you think, because I think what I'm going to try and do actually is to go through the data and look at some trends for myself over the last 4 years, and see what we get out of the Campus Expression Survey. Certainly interesting. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. May you stay curious, everybody.